What's up guys, welcome back to the channel. This is truck bed camper build part 2. And in this part of the build series, we're going to finish out this bed platform that you saw me start building in the last video. We're going to be skinning this front wall as well as the underside here. We're going to start working on ideas and possibly get our side doors taken care of. I'm still undecided if I want to do a single door or a double door. If you guys have any ideas or thoughts or anything related to the doors, please drop a comment and let me know your ideas. Also, we're going to be working on getting the roof made. So this will be the entire roof that pops straight up, as well as the mechanisms that are on the rear and front of the camper. These mechanisms will be hinged, and I'll get a little more detail into those later. If you're new here and you haven't seen any of the previous 2 videos, I recommend you go back and watch those. I have one video outlining my general thoughts, process, and idea and types of construction that I'm planning to use with this entire build. And then my second video, which I consider to be part 1, is actually the whole video of me making this structure that you see here behind us. So yeah, let's get right to it. First thing we're going to do is actually get our piece of aluminum cut that is going to sandwich up against this wall here. What I've done is I put the camper on the ground so it's at a workable level, and then I'm using the camper as a table because this is a 60 by 120 sheet, so it's really big and awkward, and the camper is like the only thing I got that I can actually hang this off the edge here and have a nice place where I can make some cuts. What we're utilizing to do the cuts is just a skill saw from Milwaukee and then a fine tooth wood blade, and it's not a metal blade, just a fine tooth aluminum, soft enough. The higher the tooth count, the better, and it actually comes out to be a pretty clean cut with this saw. The only downside of this method I will say is it does throw a lot of aluminum chips. You can see I got my wife out here helping me hold it, and I got her wearing a raincoat and a welding mask just to avoid her getting any aluminum chips in her face. The camper back up on its dolly. We've put our sheet up against here. The 24 inches overall length was just perfect. Obviously, I measured from the bottom here to the top to verify what distance we needed to do the cut. And with it sitting up here, I got it clamped in place and made sure that all my edges look good. It actually turned out really good. And obviously this is going to be going on the inside wall. So with it clamped here, now I can take a Sharpie and mark exactly where I need to cut on it to make it inset right here on the back side of our wall. Trying to eyeball it or even just trying to measure and figure out exactly what angle I'd have to cut on each end, I think it would just be a nightmare. Being able to basically have a stencil to figure out what your cut needs to be makes this really simple. For anybody wondering about the weight of this sheet, it is 1/16 of an inch aluminum, and the sheet came in as 60 by 120. That 60 by 120 sheet only weighs about 45 pounds. So overall, it may seem like you're adding a lot of metal, but being aluminum, it's nice and lightweight, and it actually works out really well. Now we've got our wall all cut and sanded. I did have to shave the edges a little bit just to make it around those welds. And now I'm using another piece of aluminum as a stencil. So these holes are spaced every 3 inches. And I've also drawn some lines from here, and I've just lined those up with those rails for our bed. With this clamped in place, now I can drill some pilot holes for the rivets. First one I'm going to do is this center, and then I'll work on the left and the right, and then we can start working on the rivets around all of our edges. The combination of having some straight lines, a good jig, and also this Milwaukee riveter really made this a lot more simple than I anticipated. I'm using some 3/16 rivets, and I'm actually also using a 3/16 drill bit. It can be a little bit of a tight fit trying to get the rivets in there. I've learned if you just kind of wallow it out just slightly, then it works out just great. So far in this project, I have used one single drill bit. That's the joy of working with aluminum. It's nice and soft and easy to drill. We got our front wall all done. Really happy with how it turned out, and really glad that I used an aluminum jig to make sure that all my rivets were spaced nice and evenly. The only ones that aren't 3 inches apart, as you can see, this gap is a little larger, and that's because if I were to do 3 inches from here, it would have ended up being uneven over here. So I just centered up 3 in the center, and it looks good enough. Did do ones in the corners there as well as down there. But overall, very happy I did that, and very happy that I took the time to make those jigs. I love making little tools that make a project turn out better, because in the end, I think it's worth the extra effort. Next up, we're going to be working on the bed platform. What we got here is some aluminum angle, and this is what the bed platform is going to rest on. We'll have one of these on each side, and that'll allow this platform to be able to slide all the way forward or all the way back. Obviously, when it's in the back position, it'll be the full bed, and then you could even slide it forward and have a table over here whenever your bed's not set up. And then of course you could also lift this platform out of the way completely, put it up in there, and then have all of this standing space. Here I've just butted it up against our panel and just made that completely flush using some C-clamps to hold it in place. I've already pre-drilled some holes in this, so now all I got to do is take my drill, punch my holes through, and then take my rivet gun and go ahead and pop those rivets in. If you'd like to avoid having to rivet as much, you can always weld these on. I just prefer to do the rivets. I think in the end, the outcome is much cleaner and gives it a much more professional look. We got our supports for the bed platform all installed. You guys are probably just as curious as I was as how strong a rivet actually is. According to Google, a 3/16 aluminum rivet, which is what these are, have a shear strength of 380 pounds. Shear means force going this way. With as many as there are, and then also the back of the bed platform still resting on this piece here, I don't think we have anything to worry about as far as the strength of this when it comes to getting up and down out of bed or anything like that. Now we're moving on to figuring out our bed platform. I think overall with our sleeping area, as I have it set, it'll be about 6'2". Of course, that may seem like it's a little short, but the way this is set up, I can also slide this out a little further. It doesn't have to be resting on that edge, and then that'll kind of give me a little more room for different mattress sizes. I don't have an exact size on the mattress I'm going to run. I think the one I've been looking at is about 75 inches or so I'll just have to slide it out an inch to make it fit. And yes, I could have made it to actually fit that, but if you remember, I'm going for some maximum space here. So the way it's set up, I do have some nice standing room, even with the bed set up, and I do want to keep it that way. What we're doing is running a 1x2 aluminum bar at about 53.5 inches. I figured that was best, leaving us some gap. This is going to get coated in carpet, so it slides nice and easy on these. These bars are coming in at about 29 inches overall length, and then our other front one is 53.5 as well. We will have a total of 5 bars, just like the front, so another 1, 2, 3. So what we'll do is go ahead and get this all welded up, and then bring it back for a test fit. Having a welding table where you can clamp your project down on smaller bits like this really helps when you're trying to get things square. You can see I also actually used a camera tripod as a second hand here just because of how large the piece was. I picked up this welding table at Harbor Freight. It was actually pretty cheap, and I think for the money, and if you're doing small projects, it's really something that's nice to have in the garage. Got it all welded up, got it sitting in place here. Just do a little strength test. I weigh probably 160 pounds or so. You can see it doesn't look like it's bowing or anything like that. I think it'll be plenty strong the way it is. It is a little stiff to slide it back and forth because of the rivets. What I'm actually gonna do is wrap these corners in carpet, which should help a ton. That being said, you can always just pick it up, slide it forward, and then now we have this whole space open in the bed of the truck. And then when it's time for bed, you just slide it right back out. Also, one of the things I mentioned previously is now we can actually have this slid all the way forward here, and then this becomes a table. So you still have your standing space here. You'll still have some cushion over here to the side where you can sit up here and chill out and relax while you got some food cooking and just have plenty of space. So I don't know how much I'd really use that feature just because we'd probably just cook outside under the awning to keep the food stuff out of here. But you never know, if you got some people hanging out and maybe one person sitting over here and some over here, it's kind of nice to have that option. Once again, we're cutting up some of our aluminum sheet. This is going to be the skin for the underside of the overhang that goes over the cab. Getting our piece all fitted up here. So the dilemma that I came across, ideally if you have a press brake that's long enough and you made the camper where this wall could just be flush, then you could just do one sheet with a nice clean bend that goes all the way up. Obviously I don't have the space or the tools to do that here. So what we're doing is actually button it as far up against this bar as we can go. And then we're gonna take some angle. It'll be a one solid piece that runs all the way across. It'll probably start about here because I do plan to do a 45-degree gusset. And then what that's gonna do is give us a place to rivet the end of the sheet. And then this will get riveted to the actual frame of the camper. It'll strengthen up these poles, especially with our gussets. And then in the end, it'll give us a nice watertight edge. This will be overhanging a little bit, but that's all right because it'll help keep water out even better. Once this project's all done, I'll have to tally up how many rivets I have in this thing. There's honestly far more than I anticipated, especially spacing them every 3 inches, and just a lot more places that I could utilize rivets instead of welds, which I really like. Rivets have the ability to have a little bit of movement and flexibility. As you guys may know, aluminum welds can be known to crack. Having stuff riveted together as a secondary form of connection can really help reduce the stress on other welded joints. When it comes to material planning for a project like this, you're also going to want to make sure you have extras. So this piece that I'm using here originally was going to be what I was going to attach the fabric to on the main structure of the camper. And I ended up having to buy a whole nother stick of this just because I wanted to utilize it as a sealing surface on this front edge. So go ahead and buy extra. I know it may be, an extra 50, 60 bucks, but in the end, you're not going to have to go back and pick up more material, and you're going to have some more freedom with what you can do with your available material. Really happy with how the skin on the bottom of the overhang turned out. All my corners turned out good. I did take the mouse and sander and really make sure that these were sitting nice and even and this wasn't overhanging. And when I was also placing it, made sure I didn't have any that were inset. So as you guys can see, nice and flush and just looks good. I did rivets here to help strengthen the floor up, and I didn't do them every 3 inches here because it just seemed a little redundant and unnecessary, and also saved me from having to drill because as you guys can see, I just got done drilling a ton of holes in the bottom of this thing. As I'm waiting for some other gussets to come in that are going to strengthen up other areas of the camper, starting to look at, I need to do my ceiling surfaces for my door. And while this thing's upside down is the time to do it, at least on this top part. So I'm thinking of ways that I can jig up with a piece of aluminum or something to set my flat bar and have it perfectly spaced away from the edge all the way across. So that way it's not wavy or sitting further back or forward, because we want it to be a nice, good ceiling surface. So still brainstorming on that. Alrighty, so this is what I've come up with to keep our flat bar at the correct angle all the way across here. When you get 1/8 of an inch flat bar like this and it gets to a long length, it can be a little floppy. So as you can imagine, if you're just setting it in place and trying to hold it by hand and weld it, it can be a little crooked this way, or even have bows that way or this way. So what we've done here is taken a piece of 2x4, cut little chunks, and on these chunks, they're actually cut at the same exact angle as our legs here, which is 4 degrees. Put them in a miter saw, cut them at 4 degrees, screwed them to our main piece. So now we've set our flat bar and clamped it. So it's sitting at just the right angle and it's sitting perfectly flush, which will allow us to lay a couple welds, and then I'll move the jig down to here so that way we can make sure this side is lined up as well. When you're designing your camper before you start the build, you can do all the planning in the world and think you got exactly everything figured out. And then when it comes time to build it, you're going to run into stuff like this where you got to make a jig, or you got to make some sacrifices, or really kind of figure out what is going to work best for your build. Sometimes seeing it in a 3D model is a whole lot different than seeing it in person, especially for size and scale. You can get a real perspective of what you're working with once you have it in front of you. Really happy with how these turned out. They're about as straight as they could be for the method I was using. I think there might be one little wave down there, but you probably won't even be able to see that on camera. Overall, it's gonna be a nice, sturdy ceiling surface for our doors. I did my welds about every 7 inches here. If I span the gap too far, then this would be able to wave and move around and everything. So every 7 inches, it seems nice and solid. It doesn't really have much flex to it. Once this is all powder coated and everything, I will be doing Sikaflex in the rest of these gaps, so it'll be 100% waterproof from the outside. One last thing we're gonna do before we flip this thing back over is we just got some brackets in from Sen Cut Sen. I actually designed these on their parts builder on their website, so it didn't require me to have any sort of software to make these. And I just did some basic shapes with a few bends. These I've already drilled some holes because I will be riveting these in place as gussets, and I'll show you where. These are going to go on our back side here. I didn't span the full width because we're going to have a back wall built onto the camper, so I left an inch of space for that. I did do 2 bends instead of a 90-degree bend because I wanted to leave room for our welds. So this is another gusset that's going to go right here, and it's going to tie in our corner, and there's going to be one of those at every corner as well as one of these on each side. Then I'll also drill my holes and have this one fastened with rivets here as well, leaving our space for our back wall. When designing these on the parts builder on sencutsen.com, you can choose at what angle you want your bends to be. Overall, this isn't 90 degrees. So what I did was 2 bend lines, 1 bend line at 45 degrees, and then this one at 41 degrees. So not quite to 90 degrees, just before, because as you guys know, our walls are at a 4-degree slant. So that let me have this fit up there nice and flush. If I would have done 90 degrees, for example, you can see it would have not lined up whatsoever, and I would have had to rivet this and then try to bend it, and it just wouldn't have worked out very well. Doing that 4 degrees while getting the parts made a huge difference in fitment. Using a clamp, I held the bracket in place, drilled my first hole, and put my rivet in, and from here, it'll sit still while I do the rest. Really happy with how these turned out. Looks nice and clean and professional, and not like I just made something out of scrap metal. Now that we got this side and this side done, we're gonna go ahead and get the camper flipped back over, and I'll work on getting these ones in all 4 of our corners. We got the rest of our brackets in. These rear ones fit really nice and flush up against this and sitting just below our tops here. The angle I did on here was perfect. You can see the weld still has plenty of room on the back side there, so I didn't have to trim it down or anything like that. This side turned out just as well. On our front side here, I did have to sand a little bit once I got in there. I had laid a weld that connected these two pieces right here, and it ended up being in my way. So if I were to do this again, I would make sure to not lay that weld so this could sit down nice and flush. What I ended up having to do was actually grind it out with a little Dremel. That way I could get as close as I can to sitting flush. And then I just sanded it to finish it off. Same with this side. And then finally, added some down here on the bottom. My reason for adding them down here is just to reinforce the section in between our legs and our base, because as you guys know, this base is going to be what's clamped to the truck, and obviously all the weight's up top. So I want to make sure this connection is nice and strong. Regardless, there'll be a 1-inch wall here, so there won't be a gap once it's all installed. Now we're working on getting our sealing surface for the bottom of the door. We're going to do the same thing that I did up top here. Our one from the top wouldn't work just because our material size was different. So I made a jig pertaining to this. We got it all clamped in place and marked where I'm going to do my welds every 7 inches. And since these are on the bottom, you're going to be able to see them. I went ahead and marked how long I want each weld. I just want this to look as uniform as possible. As I'm getting further into the project, I have noticed that my aluminum welding skills are starting to get a little better. They're not, amazing or anything like that, but they're definitely starting to improve. And I think that has to do with a lot of time behind the spool gun. If you guys are just getting into this and you're not satisfied with what you got, just keep on welding, keep on practicing, and keep on looking up different ways that you can possibly improve on your methods. So that's all of our flat bar installed for our sealing surface for our doors. Another thing I did was actually weld a little bead here and then ground it all down just to make this a nice smooth surface for our seal to sit on. A Dremel was really my friend here. This is kind of a tricky spot to get into. And like I mentioned previously, I will be doing Sikaflex to seal all the rest of this up tightly. As far as the actual doors themselves go, I'm going to get a shop that has a press brake that can handle large sheets of aluminum, and I'm going to figure out exactly what size door I need, and I'm going to get them to bend one up for me. So basically it'll be a flat sheet, and then our edges are going to be folded in. I just don't have any way to bend it nice and accurate, and I'd rather it just be right, especially with the cost of those sheets. In the meantime, we're working on our roof. I've cut all my pieces out, simply doing 45-degree cuts and then holding it up to the back of the camper and making sure it's the exact same size as our existing structure. I'll go through and get it all tacked together. I got these clamps just kind of holding it in place. If it doesn't line up perfectly, don't worry about that, because we're going to be welding it and then grinding it, and it'll all smooth out and look nice and uniform once that's done. I think the most important part here is making sure that it's the exact same size as your camper already is. That way it's not a little bit larger or a little bit smaller and then ends up looking funny. I tackled the roof the same way that I tackled our main structure in our first video. Got everything tacked together, and then for our finished welds, I stood it up so I could weld horizontally instead of trying to do vertical welds and fighting gravity the whole time. With the main structure of our roof all welded up, we're going to start working on these supports that you see that kind of grid through here. Our two center ones are going to be exactly 14 inches apart because I think I'm still going to add an exhaust fan. And I know from past builds and even just looking online, the exhaust fans require a 14 by 14 opening. So I'll just go ahead and do my two center ones right at 14 inches, and then I can add in some horizontal ones anywhere I decide to put the fan. We'll do a total of 4 front to back, and then we'll do a total of 3 side to side. After that, with our aluminum sheet on top of this and everything all riveted together, it should be nice and solid and still sturdy. We are using 3/4 of an inch tube, still 1/8 of an inch wall, so smallest material that we've used so far. And I did that because I wanted to maximize my space with my lid here and make sure that I had enough room for bedding, and also to save some weight and cost. This will be plenty strong once it's all gridded up. I don't plan to stand on this roof or anything like that, but it should be nice and strong. I'll go ahead and take some measurements here with our stock, and then I'll get all of our pieces cut and we'll get them welded in. First thing I did here was go through and put marks exactly where I want each end of our stock to land, and this will allow me to make sure that everything is nice and square. What I'm using to cut it is a regular wood miter saw with a Diablo Steel Demon blade. This allows me to cut it just as fast as you could just cut some wood, a lot faster than the bandsaw, and saves you a ton of time when you got to make a lot of cuts like this. I started in the middle and worked my way out, just so if anything was a little smaller or bigger, it wouldn't be pushing our sides out or pushing our bars over to one side as we go. Got the support grid for our roof all completed. You can see we do have an extra support over here. I think I mentioned previously, I'm going to be adding a roof vent fan possibly to this build. So I went ahead and created an opening that's going to fit. The ones I'm looking at need a 14-inch opening. So I'm 14 inches this way and 14 inches that way. And once I add my roof skin, I can cut off that hole later if I do decide to add it. As far as the welding goes, I just did some welds on these inside corners. I avoided doing the top so I didn't have to grind it all flush just to be able to skin the roof. Having this this all clamped into place, I think really helped a lot. It made sure that I'm nice and flush here on our edges, or at least close enough. If I would have just done this on the ground and welded in all these pieces, I think I would have got it back up here, and I would have came to realize that maybe some of my sides were bowed in or a little bowed out. So having it up here to reference size against the existing structure, I think really makes a big difference on this step. When I was starting to weld these inside ones, because it's such a long stretch of 3/4 tubing, it actually was kind of dipping in the middle. As I got to my ends here, I realized that before I weld these outer ones and really tie everything together, I actually took a floor jack, as you may have saw in the time lapse, and jacked up the center of this to level everything out before I welded these in. So now, as you can see, you're looking all the way across and it's a nice level surface. Before, it was kind of bowed down in, which would have made it a little more difficult to get the rivets and everything in there when I was skinning the top later. All right guys, so that actually wraps it up for this part of the video. I was gonna do the doors and the roof skin in this one, but I gotta work on this hinge mechanism to be able to help assist lift the roof. And I think that almost deserves its own dedicated video, because I was obviously looking online and looking for ideas and all that. And there is a few out there, but there's really not a whole lot of information showing you exactly how it operates. So the next video is gonna be all about that hinge system for our roof. We'll get that all situated. We'll also get the skin on our roof, and after that we will get our doors. And then once all those things are complete, it's time to pull that camper shell off the Tacoma. We'll get this camper on the truck itself, and we'll start working on that back door area. So as always, thank you guys so much for watching. Feel free to leave feedback in the comments, good or bad. I definitely listen to what you guys say. If you guys remember from the last video, I had a few of you guys, I think it was Jack, recommended that I do some gussets all around the frame there, just to help sturdy it up since it did have to grind down those welds. See, I implemented that into the build, and I love hearing great ideas from you guys, and it helps me out, because sometimes just having one person looking at a project trying to think things over, you can't quite get the same amount of good ideas as if you have a hive mind going after it. So please leave those in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one.